Good evening, everyone. My name is Beth, and I'm the marshal for this event this evening. I'm going to start with the Territorial Acknowledgement. We humbly acknowledge and send our gratitude to the original ancestors of these Dish with One Spoon treaty lands, through which the Speed and Moser rivers course. This treaty, bound by the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and the Haudenosaunee share the territory and protect the land. Here in these river valleys, we have learned that the Attawandaron, or neutral peoples, were also among the original stewards. We'd like to recognize the enduring presence of Indigenous peoples on this land and the history of the First Nations peoples and neighboring First Nation, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Today, there are a wide number of Indigenous peoples who call this territory home under the Haldimand Tract Treaty and Treaty 3 with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Okay, I'd like to welcome you to this Speed to Sea event. It is part of the 10th annual 2Rivers Festival that celebrates and appreciates the Speed and Moser rivers. Our hearty thanks to Jeremy Shute for sharing his passion for our rivers with you, and thanks to all of you for attending this event. The festival is organized and run by volunteers and involves many community organizations. Please support these organizations that are doing good work in our community. Please also support our advertisers and our event sponsors, CFRU, Mike Schreiner, and Mickey Shepard, who made this event possible. You can see all of our advertisers on our website. We have over 40 great events, so please have a look and RSVP to the ones that are of interest. This festival is a project of Wellington Water Watchers. It is our hope that if we fall in love with our rivers, we will want to further protect them. And now I'll introduce Jeremy. Jeremy is a Guelph-based explorer, geographer, and musician. In his day job, Jeremy works as a partner and land use planner at a consulting company called Shared Value Solutions. Shared Value Solutions works for Indigenous nations across Canada, decreasing the impacts and increasing the benefits to those nations from development projects like mines and pipelines, for example. Jeremy has mapped the network of buried streams across and under Guelph. He is also trying to canoe from Guelph to the Atlantic Ocean with his family in yearly sections. Jeremy is also working with the 2Rivers Festival to launch a project called Take Two. It is focused on picking up garbage from the trails and waterways in the Speed River watershed and beyond. And I would personally, at this point, like to thank Jeremy for doing that, because as an avid hiker, I come across a lot of that. So, and hopefully do my share sometimes in picking that garbage up. So thanks, Jeremy, and welcome. And I'll turn it over to you now.
Great. Thank you very much for that introduction. It's great to be here. I see there are some people in the waiting room. I don't know if they are.
I'll attend to that right now. Thank you very much for letting me know.
So thanks everybody for joining this evening. I have a question. To you, and unfortunately I can't see many of you, but I am curious if people were at this presentation last year, or if this is the first time that you've seen this, because we're going further and further each year. I'm kind of curious. So I'd like to, know how much do I spend on kind of covering the whole trip versus how much do I spend of the time over the last year. So yeah, if you wanted to just pop into the chat, and for those of you who are new to Zoom, at the bottom you hover over the bottom, there's a little chat button, and you can just press the chat button, and then things come up. So I can see, for example, somebody saying, I was here last time, I was here last year, this is my first time. So it looks like kind of a combination combination. So I'll kind of go with that sort of combination, um, and start there. I mean, one thing is I don't want to dwell too much on the same things that people may have heard before, but I also, I don't want to recycle too many of my jokes, and so that's another piece. I don't want to say the same jokes that I said last year, and then people say, "Oh yeah, I heard that joke before." Um, anyway, I also know that we're competing tonight with a hockey game, which is starting in about an hour's time. So I, if people start sort of peeling off at 8 o'clock, I recognize that you're either a Leafs fan or a Canadian fan, and so no worries there. Anyway, I'm going to share my screen and kind of get going. Okay. Okay. Beth, is that screen come up?
Yes.
Okay, great. So, um, so I'll revisit this map in a minute, but basically, I just want to start and just let people know what I'm doing and what we're doing. So, 4 years ago, with my family, with my wife and my two sons, and then a number of other people like my brother, my brother-in-law, some of my nephews, a number of friends. Um, we we left Guelph, launched two canoes at the confluence of the Speed and Moser River, just by the boathouse. If you're from Guelph, you know that area, and uh, paddled down and headed downstream. And our goal is to kind of make it out from Guelph as close to the Atlantic as we can make it. So we've called it Speed to Sea, the Speed River being the start, and the sea, whatever that might be, being the end. We don't have a firm finishing point, but trying to figure out, as we go, kind of what that might be. Um, I'm sort of thinking right now that once we get out past Quebec City and the river starts getting pretty wide, that you know I think if we could see a whale from our canoe, that might be kind of enough to sort of say, okay, if we've hit salt water, we've hit tidal water, and we've seen a whale from our canoe, maybe that means that we could call that a stopping point. But at this point, we don't really have a defined stopping point. It really depends on how well our little boats do in the big water. So, for those of you who know Guelph, we decorated this bear before we left. And this is us. This is us leaving Guelph. I think that's Gow's Bridge, and that's my wife in the bow with the orange life jacket. My two sons are in the blue canoe beside us, and that's me with the green shirt. Just for a little bit of context, I did map a bunch of the buried streams, and this is one of them. This is Pond Creek. So the water that we're paddling on is ultimately coming um, from all sorts of creeks across Guelph and upstream, and this is just one of the ones in Guelph. Just for a little bit of context, that creek is flowing through the city of Guelph and out into the Speed River. So I'm just going to give you a little bit here about our direction. So we've started. Beth? Can you see my mouse when I hover over the screen?
Yes.
Okay, so we've started here, just around where the M in Mississauga is, Guelph, and then we've gone down the Speed River to the Grand River, to Lake Erie, across to the Niagara River, and then we've taken the Niagara River down to the Erie Canal and across to Lake Ontario. And we sort of made it a couple of years ago to the end of Lake Ontario. Last year we had to skip a section. You'll see this again sort of throughout the presentation. But we had to skip a section because of COVID, and we couldn't do a piece of the states on the east end of Lake Ontario. So we started in Kingston and paddled down to Cornwall. So the quickest way to the ocean would be to continue straight across the Erie Canal out to the Hudson River. This is the Hudson River going down here. The Hudson River and the Erie Canal meet at Albany, New York, and go down to New York City. That'd be the quickest way. We also looked at going around Lake Ontario, but again, small boats, big water, they don't do too well together. It's manageable, but it's not necessarily fun all the time. So we decided to skip that route. And then once we get to Quebec City, we can either kind of go on the North Shore or the South Shore. If we took the South Shore and towards the Gaspé, we could actually hop over the height of land here and get into the St. John River and take it down to St. John. So that's one possible route. I don't know if we'll even make it that far. We're going to probably make it somewhere into this area, I would think. I've also, last year after the presentation, somebody contacted me and said that there's a route actually from between Montreal and Quebec that goes down to Portland, Maine. So that's another possibility going down through there. So we're not there yet, so we still have time to choose. Fixed up some old cedar canvas boats to take on the trip. This is one. You can see kind of the shape that it started in, and this boat was given to me by my friend Tony Darman. Thank you, Tony. And it's now looks a lot better. Going down the Speed River. So I'm just going to let you know a couple of other names. So the Speed River is also a Wendat name. Yondawan also means fast flowing. And so that's maybe where the Speed got its name. And then down to the Grand River. Grand River, a couple of other names for the Grand River. One is Ushgoa and another one is Tinnatua. Both of those are Iroquois or Haudenosaunee names. I don't know specifically which language, but I do know that this Ushgoa is kind of interesting because this is the River Ouse was a river in or is a river in Yorkshire in England, and that name I think was brought over the Grand River was called that by Simcoe, and so that somehow made its way into the traditional name or a name that's used at Six Nations. Peshinaguning is an Anishinaabe-Mowin name, which means the one that washes timber down and drives away the grass weeds. And I think that the reference there is that as the Europeans colonized and sort of cut a lot of the trees, the river kind of flowed, and they actually moved the tree. One of the kind of historic economic uses of the river was to basically move trees down, and there were sawmills all the way along the river at places where the river would drop. And then down to Lake Erie, Wabishkigu, Gijigami, and then the Niagara River. So this was year one. For those people who are interested, there's a thing called the D Colonial Atlas, which can give you all kinds of names, but also all sorts of other interesting things. There's a link to it there, the D Colonial Atlas. This is the Speed River leaving Guelph, a couple of weirs, the dam. This is going underneath the Hanlon Expressway. So right off the bat, we left in the summer. The water's low, and we spent a lot of time walking. You can see the cedar canvas boats. They don't do really well in the shallow water, but they're great when the water's a little bit deeper. So we had to take our time. Just downstream of Guelph, this white boat is the one that I showed you earlier. It's in much better condition now. It's been fixed up. The river is quite beautiful. This is just a kilometer or two downstream of Guelph, going down the Speed towards Cambridge. And this is what it looks like when you reach Hespeler. Old mill buildings on at the dam, so that at all places where there was a drop, many places where there was a significant drop, they would put in dams and mills. And at one time, they actually put in a series of locks. Something like 9 locks were built up the Grand River to try and make it navigable by the Grand River Navigation Company. Um, for those people interested, this is the kind of little map of the water quality from the Grand River Conservation Authority's website. And green is the better water quality. You can see upstream of Guelph, the water's in pretty good condition upstream in the Grand River. But then as you start to hit the urban areas, the water quality deteriorates. That's Kitchener, Waterloo, that's Cambridge, Guelph, and Brantford. There are 4 water intakes, surface water intakes for drinking water across the Grand River. One just upstream of Guelph, one in Kitchener, one in Brantford, one of the Six Nations, and there's actually one down in Lake Erie as well. This is approaching the 401, so it's not every day that you get to paddle under the 401, but it was pretty neat to do that. And on our way through there, we met a couple of guys sitting with lawn chairs in the river, their feet in the river, and drinking beer. It was a really hot day, and they were just under the highway, hanging out in the shade, drinking beer. This is when the Speed River hits the Grand. So that's my brother and my son in the Grand. I'm taking this photograph from the Speed River, and they're in the Grand River. And for anybody who's interested in paddling down this way, that's an island right there. And there are numerous islands along the Grand and some along the Speed that are great for camping. So now down the Grand River, starting here in Cambridge. That's where the Speed hits the Grand. In Preston. So this is pulling into Preston. Again, you can see the straight line of a dam in Preston. So as you go through Hespeler, there are 3 dams in Hespeler and then a couple of more. So it actually takes a little bit of work to get past Cambridge because of all the portaging. Another dam portage, as we said. That's my brother portaging in that dam in Preston. And this is downtown Preston from the river. So you can see it's been greatly channelized, and there's some old pictures of this area being flooded and flooding right into the city. We stopped underneath that bridge. There's a set of stairs that comes out. We parked underneath that bridge and went in for coffee, which is kind of fun to be able to stop for coffee, stop for a latte on the trip. We also visited some other buried streams. This is going into Mill Creek, which empties into the Grand River in Cambridge. And for those of you from the area, you might also be familiar from Mill Creek because I think it gets its name from the Aberfoyle Mill. And in Aberfoyle, the small creek that passes through there eventually makes its way out to the Grand River. And this is going upstream. There's all sorts of interesting remnants of old industrial development along the river, and this is one of the kind of iconic features that's between Cambridge and Paris. There are 2 or 3 of these big abutments in the middle of the river, now just kind of growing in. In Paris, people often ask, where do you camp? And so we take everything as if we're in a backcountry canoe trip. We bring all our food, we bring rain gear, we bring our tents, we bring first aid, we bring emergency supplies, repair kits, the whole bit. And then we don't know any given night where we're going to stay and where we're going to end up sleeping. And so as we got into Paris, it was you can see the length of the shadows. It was starting to get dark. There was a guy walking his dog at the shore, and I asked him if he knew a flat spot where we could camp, and he brought us into this municipal park. So that wasn't quite what I expected, but we thought, what the heck? Let's just camp here. It's late in the night. Probably the police won't come by or anything or by law. We probably get by staying here. We sort of stayed on the edge of the park. And we were fine. We did get have this person and her pet python named Linguini visit us that that evening, and she takes her snake out every evening to for a walk in the park. She said, and she introduced it to us because she said it needs more socialization. I don't know what the extent of, I don't know what a really social snake looks like, or how social this snake would eventually become, but probably not that social. This is the Grand River opening up a little bit as you go into Brantford. It's really quite beautiful. Lots of stretches. It's quite beautiful. There's some places where it's a little bit beaten up, but generally, as you pass the municipalities, as you get into the municipalities, the water quality kind of deteriorates and it starts to get a little bit smelly. Sometimes, as you get close to the dams, the water quality starts to drop noticeably. But then it cleans up. It's like it cleans itself really quickly. Like it's not too far downstream past the municipality when the water starts to feel better and smell cleaner and look cleaner, and you start to see more wildlife. Below Brantford, we paddled through the night to make it down to Six Nations, and we pulled into the Six Nations in the campground there, kind of well past midnight. Ate dinner. It's like a late dinner, maybe at 10 p.m., sitting in our canoes in the middle of the water. And stayed for a couple of days at Chiefs Wood Tent and Trailer Park at Six Nations, because we had beaten the boats up a little bit in the shallow waters in the Grand River and the Speed River, and I needed to do some repairs. When we were there, Carolyn King, who some of you may know, she's a former chief of Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and she recently got the Order of Canada. She's working on a project called the Moccasin Identifier Project, and there's actually a Moccasin Identifier event at the 2Rivers Festival. The idea is that if social distancing rules permit, Carolyn's going to come up with the idea that that people can bring their own canoes out and have them stenciled. So Carolyn brought out her stencils, her moccasin stencils, and stenciled a couple of different moccasins on this canoe. So the one she's doing here is an Ojibwe moccasin. Ojibwe, from what I understand, people would recognize each other by the moccasins, the type of moccasins they're wearing, and the way that those moccasins were sewn. And Ojibwe actually is the term meaning puckered stitch. Ojibwe kind of recognizes the way the moccasins were built. Here's Carolyn telling a little bit of the story.
Help people understand our connection to the land and to the water. And I'm
going to restart that because it started a little bit late there. Restart.
So one of the things about the moccasin identifier is that it will help people understand our connection to the land and to the water. And I start my talks and I say, we as First Nations people, if we do not get a marker on the ground today, we will be lost forever. So this marker system will allow us to, in a nice way, let people know our connections to the water and the land. And in history, and the record will tell you that all of our lifestyle was literally tied to the waterways. So as we go through this province, and as your project goes down the Grand River, they can see the moccasin as it floats down there. I'm very honored to be on it.
Thank you, Carolyn. So if people are interested, look in the schedule for the 2Rivers Festival, and you can see notice about the event. I think it might be June the 12th. It's a Saturday afternoon. It's going to happen down Royal City Park, and COVID permitting, Carolyn's going to come and some other people, and there's going to be sort of a stenciling event. People can bring their canoes, but you can probably have other things stenciled as well. So just keep your eye out for that, or contact the 2Rivers Festival about it. and just recognizing the Haldeman Tract and Six Nations and the historic tract that was given to the Six Nations or Five Nations by the Crown originally. So that tract has changed quite a bit, but that was the original tract. There was some mention in the land acknowledgement about the Attawandaron people or neutral people. And for people who are curious, this is a map that shows sites in the 1600s where the neutral or Attawandaron people lived. So here's Guelph up here, so you get a sense. This is the Six Nations right here. So Brantford is right here, and the Six Nations right here. So right across the river from the Six Nations. This is Cayuga down in the Lower Grand, and then over at this end, this is where Fort Erie is, for example. And so that's where the Attawandaron and neutral people lived. So in the 1600s, they were some combination of amalgamated, wiped out, dispersed, so they're no longer here. Although there may be people who have sort of ancestry, neutral or Attawandaron ancestry, but this tribe is no longer here. As we went down, there are all sorts of interesting things, like the bridges are basically the places where people get to the water, and this is a bunch of kids. They've got a rope ladder and a swing, and they climb up, and then they leap off of this river abutment. This is in Caledonia, at another dam. There's a Caledonia Mill just below the dam. It's quite beautiful. Lots of beautiful places along the river. And then getting closer to the bottom of the river, the mouth of the river, the river gets wider, and then you can see the wind turbine here. The land's flat, it's close to Lake Erie. It's a lot windier, hence the wind turbine's close to the Lake Erie shoreline, and the river. You just get a sense of what it looks like down near the bottom. And this is pulling into Port Maitland. So Port Maitland is the biggest port in Lake Erie on the Canadian side. We had our canoes rigged for sail as well. You can see it's still a working port. It was used in the War of 1812, and it's been used for millennia, probably as shelter from storms on Lake Erie. So Lake Erie that's Lake Erie. That's going out from the Grand River. That's what Lake Erie looks like just as we're just about to enter it. And then, so we're now here down in Port Maitland, going out into Lake Erie.
Jeremy?
Yes.
There's a question in the chat. Somebody wants to know how many days it would take to get to Fort Erie.
About 5 days. I think we probably had about we probably had 4 nights, I think. I think we camped probably 4 nights. Paddled about 5 days and 4 nights to get there. So this is Lake Erie. It's basically an inland sea. It's also, as I mentioned, the shallowest of the Great Lakes, and the water, like small winds can result in big waves on Lake Erie. And in the 1600s, the first Europeans to sail on Lake Erie mentioned the same thing. So the waves come up quickly, and because it's so shallow, small wind can make large waves. Get a sense of the scale of the lake. It's pretty neat. That's a storm coming towards us. That's a sailing ship that sails out of the top of the Wellington Canal. So we camped in a variety of different places. This is Breakwall at the top of the Wellington Canal. A friend joining us here, this guy here who come over to join us from Japan, and we camped on this spot because it was flat. We found this ball. That's my son spinning the ball. I can't remember what the ball is named in that Castaway movie, but this was our version of that ball from that movie. It's a pretty neat place to spend the night because we could watch the sun go down, and then we could watch the ships going in and out of the canal, the big ships. We rigged up GoPro on a kite and tried to do a little bit of low-tech aerial photography, a low-tech drone. So this is a shot from as the kite and GoPro are moving away from us. And this place, you can see we have 3 boats at this stage. 2 of them have their masts up for sailing, and one doesn't. Once you get to the end of Lake Erie and Fort Erie, you kind of round the corner, and then you see Buffalo. So this is city of Buffalo in the distance, and we're still in Lake Erie here, but the Niagara River isn't too far downstream from us. This is an old photo from or an old drawing from Fort Erie, and you can see all the people hunting. And last year I mentioned that they're hunting geese, and the guy who gave me that map that I showed earlier with the Attawandaron locations, community locations, contacted me afterwards, and he's an archaeologist, and he said actually these were passenger pigeons, and this is just an image of people hunting passenger pigeons, and they were hunted to extinction. You can see 4 people here hunting with their dogs, and this is at Fort Erie. So you can see the abundance of birds, and then also this idea that they were hunted to extinction. So anyway, that's, to me, is quite an interesting picture of Fort Erie. Just downstream of Fort Erie, there's also this weird structure on the shoreline. We pulled in here. We ended up camping right in the bushes over here. Although we were told by some people who were fishing out on this point, they said, no, don't camp here because it's dangerous. There are foxes. There's there's a whole bunch of contamination just washed ashore, and there's a guy who's walking around the woods with a gun. And so we ended up camping there anyway, and we talked to some locals, and they said, no, there's no contamination problem. Nobody had heard about the guy with the gun, and we weren't that worried about being attacked by foxes in the night. But anyway, this old structure, we explored all around it. Really interesting structure. It turns out it was an old amusement park that was built in the 1920s. And here's the city of Buffalo. So Buffalo was at that time a very wealthy city. Wealth driven by the power of Niagara Falls, and by their location at the end of the Erie Canal. So the Erie Canal connecting Lake Erie to basically through to New York City. And so boats would come across, they would dock here, and there was this big amusement ground. There was rides, and there were swimming pools, there was gambling. This was all swimming out here, horse races, all sorts of stuff. So it was a real sort of going concern until the stock market crashed. And then the whole thing fell apart. People stopped coming. The thing just sort of fell into rack and ruin. And it's now like, if you're interested in these sort of, it's almost like an archaeological site. Like it feels like you're going back in time, but there are all these old weird structures. This one, for example, is it's this thing here. So this thing here was built, this tower. This was the base of that old tower. There's all these kind of old pieces, and this is the Buffalo from at night. So we walked out onto the pier and took some photos of Buffalo in the night. It's quite beautiful. This is the Peace Bridge, then top of the Niagara River. So the water's really whipping through here. You can see the boats cruising up, and you can see a little bit of rapids there. We ended up portaging around those rapids just because we didn't have any support. Nobody downstream to pick us up. So we portaged around them with some help of some people we met from Montreal, and then put in the top of the Niagara River, and then paddled down the Niagara. So the Niagara, basically, we paddled around 5 kilometers an hour. Once we were in the Niagara River, we were going about 10 kilometers an hour. So basically doubled our speed. What's the Niagara River like? I mean, it's pretty neat. That downstream there's this very large set of rapids, maybe the largest set of rapids in this part of the world. And as you get close to it, you definitely feel it in your stomach. Like, you can see the mist. The falls are there. There's a dam structure. You can see that flat line on this side. There's a dam structure, and then there's a bridge on the other side. And so we stopped. We pulled in about a kilometer or so, maybe a kilometer upstream, kilometer and a half upstream of the falls. But as you we stayed close to shore because we didn't want to tip, even though I'm sure we could have got out. We could have been safe. You didn't want to tip. We didn't want to get out too far. It was pretty neat, sort of paddling up to it. And so I think the next thing here. So this is Niagara Falls. So we ended up going down to see the falls at least. We thought it would be fun to try, like, we knew we had to portage the falls. Obviously, we couldn't, go down the falls, but I had scouted out the portage, and it's like a 10-kilometer portage. It's a really long portage. You have to go well down to basically down to the Brock Monument to get back in the river. So it was a long way. But we thought, well, at least we're there. Let's just sort of portage the falls, just sort of just to do it, just to portage past the falls. And while we were doing that, we sort of set up the cameras and just kind of staged this little portage picture. And the word kind of went out. We didn't know, but the police were talking on the radio saying there's a guy with a canoe headed for the falls. And so when we were down here doing this, all of a sudden cruisers showed up and a whole bunch of police officers showed up on bikes. And there was a lot of drama for about 15 or 20 minutes until people understood what we were doing. And then we convinced them to take a photograph with us. So all of these officers here then all took a photograph with us. There were another same number of police, behind the camera and as they were in front of it. So that was basically the end of our first year. But I'll just maybe say a few other things about Niagara Falls. So for people who are familiar with the Niagara Escarpment, basically that's what Niagara Falls is. Niagara Falls is where the water from Lake Erie goes down the Niagara River and falls over the Niagara Escarpment. So this red is the Niagara Escarpment. People are probably familiar with it up through the Bruce Peninsula and whatnot. And then it actually carries on over into New York State. So that's Niagara Falls is the escarpment. Here's a little image. So the escarpment at one time was down here, closer to Lake Ontario, and then over time it's just eroded back. That escarpment bluff has just eroded back and back and back and back. And when Europeans first came to Niagara Falls in the late 1600s, they basically marked its location. And in 1678, here's where the falls were, and the falls have sort of slowly, since that time, have eroded back, I don't know, like 400 meters or something. So these are the different dates. and the location of where the falls were. And so the falls, this is the falls, the current location of the falls. The erosion of the falls has dramatically slowed because the water is managed. So so now the falls you see during the day are dramatically lower at night because the water is diverted to hydroelectric plants on both sides, both the American side and the Canadian side. So if you go to Niagara Falls in the middle of the night, they won't be flowing. They still are flowing, but not nearly as dramatically. Niagara Falls is also the location of the Treaty of Niagara, which was in 1764. There we go, 1764. So 2,000 Indigenous leaders came from as far away as the prairies and the East Coast to sign a treaty with the Crown, with the British Crown. The British had recently had recently beat the French at the Plains of Abraham, and the French had resigned from their position of power in North America, and the British then went on to make treaties. And the first Indigenous treaty was the Treaty of Niagara in 1764, and this treaty sort of set the groundwork for all successive treaties. So this treaty now basically set the groundwork for the Indigenous relations that we have between the Crown and Indigenous nations currently to today. So all of the successive treaties across Canada, and there are lots of places that still don't have treaties, were basically stemmed from this treaty event in 1764. And that's the wampum belt. It sort of shows two people and the date of 1764. And that's the wampum belt that marked the treaty at the time. So the second year, we actually put in a little bit back upstream, closer to Fort Erie, and we paddled across the Niagara River. We got a special permit to cross because we weren't going in through like a designated border crossing. So because we just paddled across, thus paddling across from Canada to the U.S. across the Niagara River. Going through a big bridge that connects the mainland to Grand Island, and then into New York State. And New York State is also the territory of the Haudenosaunee, or the Five Nations. So the nations sort of going from Ontario to the east are the Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, and Mohawk. So eventually, when we make our way up to the St. Lawrence River, we're in Mohawk territory and Oneida territory, and somewhat in Onondaga territory. The Sixth Nation, so you can see there's a space here. The Sixth Nation was the Tuscarora, who came in much later. So it was originally the Five Nations. The Six Nations came in much later, and this was before the Tuscarora was the territory of the Wenro, who, like the Neutrals or Attawandaron, were people that were lost, were amalgamated, their communities were destroyed through war with their neighbors. New York State. Another interesting thing with New York State is it was also the location where it was a very progressive state where in the early 1800s you could buy slave-free vegetables and produce. So it was a very progressive state that was like our fair trade foods now. You could buy things that weren't produced by slavery. And these are all routes coming up into New York State and Oswego, and then up into Canada, sort of across the Niagara River, across Lake Erie, and then from Oswego and other places into Canada, and also along the Erie Canal. So there's a canal that basically connects Buffalo ultimately to New York State, New York City. New York City. This canal, built in the 1820s, basically connected New York to the Great Lakes and facilitated the development of Buffalo, of Cleveland, Detroit, Chicago. All of those cities basically were able to form because they could connect um, the Atlantic Ocean to the Great Lakes by water. So when this canal was completed, it dropped the cost of transportation by 95% and became a sort of a huge economic boom for New York State. For the city of New York, it's what made New York City the economic capital of the U.S. at the time. So we traveled along this canal. We basically paddled the canal through Rochester, through the kind of great Finger Lakes district, up to the Oswego River and out to Oswego. So these are just sort of images of going along the canal, and you can see what it's like. It was a barge canal where they actually towed boats by mule and ox, towed barges. Series of locks. Again, we still have to drop over the escarpment, and we had to go through a series of locks. This is kind of what it looks like. Pretty fun, actually, kind of cruising through a lock in a canoe. That's town of Lockport and what it looked like in the heyday of its locks. This is going into Rochester, New York, where they changed the route and sort of cut through the bedrock to change the route. The canal's pretty neat in places. It's quite wild. In other places, but we wouldn't swim, like super hot days. We wouldn't swim in the canal or anything like that. We wouldn't drink water out of the canal, or I don't think you could eat the fish from the canal. There was quite a bit of wildlife. That's a baby eagle that we saw it had a hurt wing, and it was squawking like crazy on a branch just out of reach of us. Not like we were trying to reach it. But this is a little town of Phoenix. So they have all these little port towns that are currently just places where people bike and take their power boats to. They don't see canoes, so there will be people who have paddled kind of locally, but they don't really see people coming through like we were. So people were quite curious about having a bunch of Canadians come through with canoes and camping. So we just camped it. We camped in all these little towns. Camped wherever we could. And this place had a shower and had a laundromat, and and it had hot coffee in the morning. It was pretty nice, sweet little place. All sorts of weird things along the canal. Somebody's made this old dock out of a transport truck. And an interesting thing that after the glaciers receded, the glacial meltwater ran down through this Mohawk River and out through the Hudson River, because the top glaciers were still kind of across the St. Lawrence River. So the water couldn't recede, the glacier meltwater couldn't recede through the St. Lawrence. And so it all kind of rushed out through this channel here. And then when the ice did recede from the St. Lawrence River, then the water then started going out the route that it does currently. This is going into Oswego, New York, which is the largest American port on Lake Ontario. Still, it's a working port. We had a great reception there and met some nice folks and who put us up or let us camp at a local kayak club. And then this is out on Lake Ontario at the end of our third year. Again, it's another big, huge body of water. You can get a sense of the scale of it there a little bit. And we made it to the end of Lake Ontario that year. This is where we made it to the end of our third year. And fourth year, we were supposed to paddle up the coast, but then COVID hit and we had to skip that. So we went straight up to Kingston. We put in Kingston instead. So we have this piece that we have to make up. And it doesn't look that far on the map, but it's probably going to be about a week's hard paddling. But it's also the very eastern end of Lake Ontario, so the flow of the wind typically in the summer is this direction. So the waves and whatnot are basically building up across the lake, hitting into this shore. So this shore, I think, is going to be pretty challenging. We're going to have to really pick our times to paddle it. We'll probably have to do what my friend Kit does, who may be on here, but we'll probably have to do a lot of night paddles when the wind is down and the water's calm. So that's still to be determined. So now I'm going to just go through where we went last year. So we started in Kingston, and this is the St. Lawrence River. And the St. Lawrence River in Mohawk is this word right here. I'm just practicing this today, so I'll see if I can get it. But it's Gania Torah Wane Na. And I think I butchered that, but that was as close as I can get for now. Anyway, we started in Kingston, and the reason I wanted to say this word in Mohawk is because we're basically entering into Mohawk territory. Here's Akwesasne here, here's Ganawake up here just near Montreal, and then Ganasatake is just up there, and Tyendinaga is just past Kingston here to the west. And so this was our trip last year, was from Kingston to Cornwall and through 1,000 Islands, and I'll show you a little bit more about that. Gananoque, Mallorytown, Brockville, Prescott, which is just in here, you can't see it, at Johnstown, Morrisburg, the series of Long Sault, and then Cornwall. So it's like a little kind of geography lesson, but this is the Canadian Shield. So the Canadian Shield you're used to, up in the Kawarthas and Algonquin Park and up that way. There's a little band of that Canadian Shield which then crosses the St. Lawrence River and moves into the Adirondacks, the Adirondack Mountains in New York State. And that little band of Canadian Shield is basically where the 1,000 Islands National Park is. And the reason that it's so popular is because it's beautiful, just like Georgian Bay. It's like being on Georgian Bay with 10 times as many boats and 10 times as many sea-doos. Just as a little sense of where we are in terms of elevation, you can get a sense of these are the depths of the lakes. Lake Superior being the deepest and largest lake. Here on Erie, I remember I said it was the shallowest of the Great Lakes. There's Erie. Here's Michigan is a little bit deeper than Lake Huron there. Lake Ontario, and then now we're into the St. Lawrence. So we're going to go through the St. Lawrence. There's this Iroquois Dam or Iroquois control structure, then to the Moses Saunders Dam, which is at Cornwall. And there's one more dam, which is the Beauharnois power dam, and then from then it's then you're in downstream of that. It's Montreal and down to 2Rivers in Quebec. Just if you're interested in the 1,000 Island National Park, here's all these green spots are part of the park. So lots of little islands, both sides of the border, and then lots of little parks. So we ended up camping at a lot of those park spots along the way. And in my first year, before we left in the first year, I sent a letter to Prime Minister Trudeau to say, hey, we're going on this trip. I'd love it if you want to join us. Please feel free. Here's our dates. And so I invited him, and then the last couple of years I kind of re-invited him. The following years, mostly just by email, sort of sending messages through to the Prime Minister's office. And last year we got our first response. Prime Minister wishes you the best for a successful and fulfilling trip. However, he will be unable to participate. So anyway, it was nice that they got back to us. I'm going to send him another invitation this year. I think we're going right through his riding. So I think if he's going to come, this is maybe the year that we'll get him on board. But, fingers crossed, but I'm not holding my breath. So heading down from Kingston, we go, there's Fort Henry, and built after the War of 1812, but we paddled past Fort Henry to a place called Cedar Island, and we spent the night on Cedar Island, which is just downstream of Kingston. And this is Kingston by night from Cedar Island. This boat was docked on Cedar Island, and they had this little cage at the front because they took everywhere they went. They took their pet chicken. I can't remember the chicken's name, but they would just, when they were sitting in the dock, the chicken would just kind of cruise around, pecking at stuff, looking for food. That's what chickens do. This is the St. Lawrence River. It's beautiful. It kind of has a bad reputation, but it's a beautiful river. Like we had an amazing time on this river. It's all kinds of different structures and cottages all the way along. It's lots of people have built places, and it is kind of like the Kawarthas or the Muskokas, and it was a real destination, especially for Americans, but also for Canadians for building building cottages. This little funny cottage also had this tiny little place had a sign here. You can't quite see it there, but it basically said no hunting. So you can see the size of it. There wasn't any really good hunting to be had. Anyway, so we didn't hunt there. We followed the sign. This place here, they had a bonfire out on the thing here. They were burning gasoline and letting fire and shooting fireworks into the water. So we had to sort of keep our distance from them because they were shooting the fireworks out like completely horizontally, and they would go about 50 meters. These fireworks, it seemed to be having a good time. The lads who were hanging out at that cottage on the weekend. These are some of the industrial structures along the river. So it's a St. Lawrence Seaway. There's all sorts of large elevators, stockpiles of things. There are these. You get a little sense of some of these structures. There's lots of these things built along the shoreline. You get a sense of some of the scale of some of these structures. They're massive, and I don't know what's coming and going, but they have really large lakers, large boats loading and unloading and traveling up and down the coast. This is what we looked like. I see Peter's on here. This is our friend now here in the bow of the canoe. That's my brother and my son. That's my nephew and his friend over there. This is our crew kind of going through the Thousand Islands near Gananoque. And moving along towards one of the two big bridges that we paddled under. We had there was an article written in the Kitchener-Waterloo Record last summer about our trip, and in that we said, hey, if anybody's got a place to camp, let us know. And it turns out that a woman named Nora reads that paper every day. She's from Kitchener, but she now lives down in the Thousand Islands area. And she contacted me and said, hey, I saw the article, come and stay at our place. So we ended up camping at her place, and she had this great dock. And this is my son, Nigel, and our friend now. A little bit of a sneak attack. Cool thing about the Thousand Islands area is that there's a very unique tree, the pitch pine, which is found in a little bit in southern Quebec. Only places it's found in Ontario are on the southern side of the Thousand Island, of southern side of the islands in the Thousand Islands, and that's the example of the pitch pine there. And that's the U.S. border. That's the U.S. across the water. So, however, let's say maybe 500 meters across or whatever is the U.S. So last year was kind of a funny year. This is taken from Nora's place as well. That's the U.S. on the far side. It was a bit of a funny year because of COVID. There was lots of challenges with people trying to cross the border, and the border was closed. It was hard closed, so we weren't allowed to paddle in American waters last year. We were only allowed to paddle in Canadian waters, and they had patrols going up and back and up and back along the border. This is Canadian Coast Guard. You can see the Canadian flag here, stopping a group of Americans who were probably 20 meters into Canadian waters, and checking to see if they were Canadian Americans. It was $750 fine per person for anybody who had come across into Canadian waters. Here we're paddling. This is just a little bit further downstream, and those are my two sons over there, and they're in American waters and we're in Canadian waters. So they kind of, the border takes these funny jigs and jogs this way and that way, and you can't really tell you don't know where it is. It's not marked or anything like that. So I just had a GPS, and they were ahead of us and they couldn't hear us, and I was saying, paddle to the left, you're in the States. But they didn't hear. They just sort of paddled, through the, they spent like 10 minutes paddling through the States here. But we tried. This is the border. Here, this brown line is the border, and this blue line is our canoe. Is the canoe that I'm in. We're trying to just hit the corner. Just cross over the very corner, before we kind of, followed our own path. But this was basically just a little indication of how close we came at times to getting into the States. This is Brockville, which is about halfway down between Kingston and Cornwall, and we paddled into Brockville. So that's sort of paddling into Brockville. This is what downtown Brockville looks like, and this is the port. And there was a couple sitting out on a boat. I think it was just right in here, or maybe it was even this boat, the back of this boat. And they were just saying, "Hey, how's it going? Where are you coming from? How's your trip?" And it turns out that they were undercover police who were checking to see if Americans were coming into the Brockville port. So we paddled in. This was us paddling into the port, and they didn't know where we'd come from. So when we pulled up on shore, a cruiser kind of came up and they checked us all out and asked us where we'd come from and what we were doing, et cetera, et cetera. So it was kind of interesting. Other interesting thing about Brockville is that they've got an underwater sculpture park. So they've buried or dropped a bunch of sculptures, lowered them into the river, and people go there to dive into this underwater sculpture park. And this is one of the sculptures. I just took this picture off the web, but it's kind of cool. And because of zebra mussels, the water is way more clear than it used to be, and so now people this has become a real sort of diving destination. Other interesting thing, I don't know if you remember the map. I should have pointed it out early, but along this stretch where Brockville and Prescott are, the river's quite narrow. And in the War of 1812, there were raids back and forth. And this guy Forsyth raided Brockville, which it wasn't called Brockville at the time, but raided Brockville. They took a bunch of things. They burned down a bunch of things, and then they went back. And then a week later, the British went down the coast raided Ogdensburg, New York, sort of took them by surprise, burned down a bunch of things, and went back to and went across. This was in the winter. They basically walked over the ice and went back to the Canadian side. And then the following day, following the British attack on Ogdensburg, the wife of the sheriff of Ogdensburg walked across by herself to the British fort to ask for her mirror back, because in the attack on Ogdensburg, there was a bunch of looting, and somebody took her mirror and took it back with them. And so she just walked on her own, went right back to the fort and said, "Hey, somebody stole my mirror and I want it back." And it turns out that actually it had been lost, so she didn't get her mirror back, but she was okay. This is Fort Wellington, so a fort that was that's near Prescott, and that was instrumental in the War of 1812, and blocked the river for vessels going up and down. At the time, there were 9 sets of rapids between Kingston and Montreal, so boats would have to slow down. They have to be smaller boats, and they'd have to go slowly through rapids and navigate their way up through the rapids. And this fort was built at one of those pinch points. You can see a little sense of how narrow the river is there. And in the 1970s, there was a guy, his name, the Mad Canadian, his name was Ken Carter. So Ken planned a jump over the river in Lincoln Continental, and he ended up not doing the jump, but somebody else did it. This was sort of the time, the Evel Knievel era, and another stuntman, a guy named Kenny Powers, actually did the jump, and they outfitted a Lincoln Continental with some rockets, and he jumped up off of this thing. I guess Lincoln Continental is not very aerodynamic. He made it only part way. The car flipped. Car flipped and went into the drink, and he ended up breaking his back. And that was in like the mid 70s. Some other interesting things. This is at Dark Island, which we paddled out to one evening. Dark Island is owned by the Singer family, and they built their own castle. This is their castle. So the American border, we paddled up to American border is about 100 meters offshore. So we paddled up to the edge and just looked at this one evening. And this is the servants' boat entrance. So this is where they would bring all the supplies in, and the people who worked in the castle. And on the other side, it was the more elaborate, ornate docks. And this was owned by the Singer family, for Singer sewing machines. And it's still a place we couldn't visit it last year, but generally you can visit as a tourist. Also, at this stage, we basically hit the seaway. So the river is kind of convoluted. There's islands, there's different sections of it, deeper and shallower sections. And here we are hitting our first kind of large laker on the seaway. This is zipping under the Iroquois control structure, Iroquois Dam. We actually had to go into American waters to actually get through this little section. And then we were into the big boats. And so when we went under this dam, and we came out into this section where there was a lock, and this boat was moving towards us, and another boat was coming from behind us, but they were moving pretty slowly at this stage, so we just it was either sit out in the middle of the river and have these boats, pass by us close by, or we just what we did was we just punched through in front of them. So this is one coming towards us, and then the two boats sort of crossing behind us. You can see that's my nephew Julian there. You can see the sort of happiness on his face after getting out of the way of those boats. We felt a lot of relief, and that's us sitting on the shore watching the one boat pull into the lock. You can see the structure, that dam structure at the back that we just come from. We're 4 boats now at this point. And just a little sense of what it's like out there with the boats. Like they're pretty big. You get a scale, you get a sense of scale. There's a canoe right here. It's one of us, one of our crew. And then that's this big laker. And then that red marker there is the edge of the shipping channel. They put a big wave. You can see there's a big wave at the front here. So they push this big wave, and it creates a big like wake, sort of forward wake on the boats that then rolls across. But it's not too bad. Like it doesn't cause us any problems. You can see here, this is just a map from Google Earth, but this is the St. Lawrence River and the St. Lawrence Seaway. It's now St. Lawrence Seaway. So the Seaway was actually constructed in the 1950s, but before that, there were all these series of dams, of locks and canals. You can see all along the Canadian shoreline here, there are all these little funny structures. You can see those little walls and structures. So these are old canals that were built all through here, and there were locks all the way along. Wherever there was a town, wherever there was a lock, there was a town. And so you can see all these old structures. So as we paddled through this, Prescott is here, and Johnstown, and we ended up camping in a little spot right in here somewhere. We weren't sure quite what the sort of route was through, or the best way to get through all these places. So I went, and there were a bunch of people hanging around, and I went and asked them. I said, does anybody have a boat? Does anybody know what the water's like down here? And somebody said, oh, Bob might know. And yeah, Bob would probably know. So then I went and talked to Bob. This is Bob and Brenda. And it turns out that Bob and Brenda were the cartographers for for NRCan, Natural Resources Canada, who drew the map, who made the map for this exact location. And they happened to have the map, the navigation map for the river in their car. So they made that map. If I can just show you here, see this little wobble here on the river? There's that same wobble right there. So not only, is that sort of thing, oh, maybe Bob knows. Well, Bob actually knows as well as anybody on Earth. A few more Canada steamship lines, Paul Martin's company, and this is the bridge at Johnstown going across to Ogdensburg. So as I mentioned, they built the dam. They built the Moses Saunders Dam was completed in 1958. So that's the dam at Cornwall. But they were trying to, for about a decade, they were building the St. Lawrence Seaway and trying to create the ability for large boats, large ships to move from the Atlantic into Lake Ontario. The Wellington Canal had already been constructed by this time. And so this was the biggest construction project of its era. And this is the St. Lawrence River. So the dark blue is the original river. And then the light blue is the flooded river once they put in the dam. So the dam went in here at Cornwall. This island right here is Akwesasne. So there were towns. There was a highway. Highway 2 went along this. I think that's maybe the location of Highway 2 there. Highway 2 went along here. That's the railway went through here. There were villages and towns on both sides of the river, but mostly on the Canadian side. And you can see a number of those locations where there were villages and towns, and those were, and then there were people living all through here, and they basically all got flooded out when they built the dam, and they compensated. They paid fair market value for the properties, but by the time they did that, this is just what I read, and at least, but the time that they actually made that transaction, property values had shrunk dramatically because everybody knew the land was being flooded. So they got a good deal on the properties. But they also flooded all sorts of lands that were used by Akwesasne. And my understanding is that there was no consultation or discussion with them. They just flooded Akwesasne's lands and just kind of carried on. That was kind of the nature of the relationship between the Crown and Indigenous nations all over the place. The work I do, I see this all the time, where lands have just been flooded or changed or whatnot. Nobody ever spoke to the Indigenous people when it was happening. And that was definitely the case with the St. Lawrence Seaway, construction of the St. Lawrence Seaway and Akwesasne. And I think in 2008, Ontario Hydro, now Hydro One, apologized both to Akwesasne and to non-Indigenous people whose lands were flooded during the creation of the Seaway. So this is now a series of islands. So what was all land, all part of the mainland, is now a series of islands called Long Sault. This is one of the towns. This is the Maple Grove, one of the little villages that was flooded out, and one of the locks that the ships did move in before the Seaway was constructed. They took a bunch of the buildings out, and they made kind of a museum of buildings. And this is some of the buildings that were taken, sort of rescued from before the flood. And there's a photographer named Louis Helbig, who's done a bunch of aerial photography of the old villages, and these are the kinds of shots on his website. Really, really interesting. That's an old silo and a barn. That's some other structure. You can see the vegetation only grows in certain spots. You can see the ducks or the geese on the water surface and the structure below. Mentioning Akwesasne, there are all kinds of interesting signs and along the river that the National Park has put up, and others that talk about the Mohawk Nation and the Mohawk people of the river. This is one of them. And if people are interested in, I mean, there's some awesome things that they reference. But if people are interested in knowing a little bit more, I'd urge you to look at the Haudenosaunee Thanksgiving Address. It's a really amazing document. The Haudenosaunee or Iroquois Thanksgiving Address. This is us paddling through that area of the Lost Villages, and that's an old road that coming into the water. We paddled across along an old road for a while as well. Just followed it. It was like a strip, like kind of a light colored strip with no vegetation on it under the water. And this is another kind of diving destination because of all the old structures in the water. One of the cool things, one of the sort of interesting things that we found was that last year so many places were closed because of COVID, and this is one of the parks that was closed. And so when we were trying to find places to camp, we'd pull up at the parks, and there wouldn't be anybody in the park. And so this park, you can see all the picnic tables. Like at one time, it was probably a pretty busy park, but it was closed. So we pulled up on shore and set up our camp. I think I've got a picture of our camp. Yeah, we set up our camp here, and we basically had the park to ourselves. But then when we walked out to the road, there was flagging tape along all the entranceways to the park, and it said "Park closed, park closed." But nobody thinks to put the signs up on the water side, so we were able to just camp along the way at places where had the parks to ourselves because nobody was in them and they were all closed. This is the Moses Saunders Dam. So it's a huge control structure, huge hydroelectric dam, produces power on both sides. The power also brought in industry, and there's a number of other interesting sort of things that have kind of resulted because of the dams. But this is the Moses Saunders Dam taken from the Ontario side because we couldn't go into the American side. That's my wife Leslie and a little doll that has floated downstream from who knows where. So if this is familiar, if you're missing your doll, it's still there probably on the dam. We did pick up a lot of garbage along the way. We pick it up at campsites and whatnot, and then take it out and find a place to drop it off. And I would just Beth mentioned at the beginning, there's a project that we're working on, the 2Rivers Festival is working on, and I'm helping, called Take Two, which is about taking 2 pieces of garbage out with you every time you leave. And there's going to be a launch of this Take Two. It's going to be launched in a couple of weeks' time as part of another event at the festival. That's our crew at the end. We had some people who came, some people who left. This was the crew on our last day. My 2 sons, my brother, my wife, my brother-in-law, Rodolfo. If anybody knows anybody from Guelph knows Rodolfo, that's Rodolfo. That's my nephew and his partner, and that's me. And just to kind of give you a sense of scale in terms of where we've come from and where we've got to, this is the first bridge that we crossed under. And that's the last bridge that we've crossed under. And I will leave it at that. If you're interested in following our trip this summer, we're going to be starting on August the 12th, and I think for about 2 weeks from August the 12th. And we post pictures and stuff on Instagram and Facebook under Speed to Sea. You're also welcome to contact me here at Speed to Sea if you have any questions or want to know more. Happy to talk to you about it anytime. People also come and go, so if you're really itching to join us, then let me know. We're going to be, this next year is going to be pretty interesting. We're going to start below the Moses Saunders Dam. And like this last year, we tried to make it to the dam so we wouldn't have to actually portage the dam because there is no real portage. I scouted out, there's no real way around it. That's, without, carrying a canoe for probably 6 or 8 kilometers. And then we're going to go out to Akwesasne. That's the hope anyway. And then we'll go downstream. We'll get around the Beauharnois Dam somehow. I don't know how yet. And then through Montreal. So that's going to be a pretty interesting stretch, I think, trying to kind of navigate our way through or around Montreal. I'm hoping that we can take the Lachine Canal, but not totally sure if that's going to happen. But that's the hope. And then down past Montreal towards 2Rivers. I don't know if we'll make it as far as 2Rivers, but hopefully 2Rivers is also kind of a real hub of canoe building. In the history of Canada, it was one of the real kind of canoe building hubs. And so we're hoping to make it down as close to 2Rivers as possible this coming summer.
Well, thank you very much, Jeremy. I wonder if there are any questions. I see somebody's.
Yeah, happy to answer questions.
If anybody has any questions, they can type them into the chat. I have one, and because I'm not muted, I'll just ask it. I'm curious to know why you use a cedar strip.
I guess I use them because I sort of have a bit of a nostalgic feel for them. I really like paddling with them. They suck on the land, but they're great in the water. So I really like paddling them. They're stable. They're really nice to paddle. They're quiet. You can load them up. They're great in the water. They're just terrible to kind of carry around. And we're not doing a whole lot of carrying of them. Also, I can patch them. I know how to fix them. I enjoy fixing them. They're fun to work on. So that's kind of why, I guess.
They're beautiful too. I was wondering how you mentioned how that you did a short carry past Niagara Falls, and I was wondering how you got the rest of the way down, because you mentioned that it was 10 miles, I think.
Yeah, it's a long way. So actually, we were going to do that. We were going to sort of go around and start below the falls, but then we changed our plan, and instead we took the Erie Canal. So instead of going past the falls,
oh, I see,
we actually went back up the river, crossed over the river, and then went through the Erie Canal to the east and through New York State.
I see. Okay. All right. Well, that answers my questions. I'd like to thank you so much for this very, very interesting talk. And this is an amazing odyssey that you're on. I'm incredibly impressed. So I guess you're going to be presenting again next year.
Yeah. So next year I'll probably present on the next section. I'll probably talk about whatever we do. I see Kevin Reed on the out there. I'm going to probably ask Kevin some questions about the American eel, so that I know more about the story of the American eel before my presentation next year.
Well,
but definitely, we'll be talking about our trip through Montreal if we make it that far.
Right. Well, we'll look forward to that next year. And this has been a wonderful experience for me. I've been hearing about it for the last couple of years, and this is my first chance to actually see it and have the honor of hosting or marshaling the event. So I guess we'll say good night now, and thank you on behalf of all of us here.
Thanks very much, Beth, and thanks for hosting, and it's great being here.
Take care. Bye, everyone.
Bye.